Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Totem Top 10 series. This is our series on basic cybersecurity hygiene and specifically the 10 most important safeguards that we recommend you implement to lower your cybersecurity risk. Today is actually our very last day of the series. So we are going to cover our final control, which is to collect and analyze event logs, and then we will dive into a wrap up of the workshop. We will discuss, well, okay, where do we go from here? How can we begin to hit the ground running with our cybersecurity program, knowing what we now know? So it's been an awesome journey. Thank you especially to Ohio SBDC and Youngstown State for giving us the opportunity to come in and do this. I've had an awesome time, and I hope that this has been valuable to you and that you're seeing some ways that you can already start to implement these controls in your own environment in an inexpensive and efficient manner. It's been one of our goals, the series, to communicate lots of different tools, technologies, processes that maybe you haven't thought of before and really aren't that difficult to put in place. They just take some time. And so with that, we'll turn our attention now to our final control, which is to collect and analyze event logs. We're going to talk about specifically how we need to be monitoring our environment for suspicious activity. We need to be able to identify what traffic is moving through our network, what our users are perhaps downloading or attempting to download from the internet or attempting to change on their computers. We need to be monitoring all of this activity and looking for potential anomalies. We're also going to dive into some considerations. I'm going to make some recommendations for how you can begin to implement this control starting soon. And I'll point you to some free tools as well as we do this. So, as I mentioned, we are a DoD contractor, and we have some pretty strict cybersecurity requirements that have been imposed on us, specifically when it comes to the NIST 800-171 and CMMC framework. And we have some pretty, like I said, some pretty strict requirements when it comes to collecting and analyzing event logs. And so I'm looking forward to sharing some of our perspectives with you today in our final session together. So this is where we stand so far in the series. You may, if you've had the opportunity to join us each session, all of these controls should look familiar to you. If you have not been able to attend every week, would recommend that you check out the Ohio SBDC YouTube channel, where you can find the recordings for each of these sessions. But as I said, today, we will wrap up with our final control. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. And before we start talking about collecting and analyzing event logs, I'd like to just start with a brief discussion of what an event log even is, because I don't think most people know. So on its simplest level, an event log is basically just a digital record of some computer event, whatever that event might be. Event logs essentially allow you to look under the hood, so to speak, and gather information about what events are taking place within a given system. For example, an event log would be generated when a user installs a new program and launches that program. An event log would also be generated if, say, a user attempts to sign on to their machine and fails. They fail to authenticate themselves into the machine. An event log would be generated for that and then stored. Or say I want to make some sort of change to my system. I want to go in and change the time, for example. An event log would be generated and then stored. So it's safe to assume that every time that you even interact with your computer, with a given system, an event log is going to be generated for whatever you attempt to do to that system. Now, within each event log, you're going to expect to find some information that describes what was happening. For example, when it comes to Windows event logs, there are a number of things that I can dig down and see in each log. I can see the date that the specific change or action took place. I can see the specific time that took place, and that's especially important. I can see the user who attempted to make that change or took that action. I can see the name of their machine potentially. I may even also see an event ID, and this is, in this case, this identifies a particular event within Windows. Windows has a specific identifier for a given event. If I were to attempt to log on to my machine, an event log would be created for that action, and a specific event ID, I forget the exact number, but a very specific ID will be then assigned to that log. And so just looking at the event ID, I know, okay, that's the event that took place. In fact, you can see in the screenshot here on the far right, event ID. Again, that corresponds to a specific action taken within Windows. And in Windows, there are essentially 5 different types that each event log is automatically grouped according to, or as soon as that event log is created, one of these types is assigned to that event log. You can expect to see errors, and this may indicate a significant problem, such as one dealing with perhaps data loss or perhaps a loss of functionality, like you start up your system, but some service, some process doesn't quite load correctly, doesn't quite start up correctly. It's going to assign, your machine's going to recognize that, and then it's going to generate an error event log, and you'll be able to see that. You may also see a warning, and this could indicate a potential future problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's significant or that it's necessarily happened, I guess, fully. For example, you may see a warning log indicating that the disk space on your machine is running low. You may, and this is probably most of what you'll see lots and lots of information logs. And these just describe some successful operation or some successful execution of a given service or function. Like say I plugged in a USB stick to my machine. My machine would then, if my machine recognizes it, it would generate an event log saying something like USB was successfully detected or something like that. Additionally, especially when it comes to security, you are going to find lots of audit successes and audit failures. Audit success essentially indicates that a security access attempt has succeeded. For example, a given user has successfully logged onto that machine. An audit success log would be generated. Or say, if you remember back to when we were talking about restricting administrative privileges, and I recommended user account control as an effective technology to complement that safeguard. If a user fails to authenticate themselves through user account control, you'd see an audit failure log appear because they failed to pass that security access attempt. And so specifically within Windows environments, which has sort of been the focus throughout this series, since Windows is what the vast majority of us use, they definitely dominate the market share. And so that's what we have focused on. But when it comes to Windows, these are the types of logs, the types of events that you can expect to see, specifically within Windows Event Viewer. I'd like to give just a quick overview of Windows Event Viewer. If you've never seen this before, I'm going to fire up my VMware workstation again. Notifications. This tool should look familiar to you. If you've joined us in prior weeks, I've relied on this tool multiple times. And this is essentially a hypervisor that allows us to work with different operating systems than maybe what is installed or running on our host machine. So it looks like I'm running a computer inside a computer. It's because I am. This is an extremely helpful tool for us engineers, especially when we have to test out different software, different programs within a sandbox environment. And so I have loaded a Windows 10 operating system into this tool, into this hypervisor, so I can play around with it. But anyways, Event Viewer is the tool that I mentioned. Just type Event Viewer, assuming if you are part of a domain and your administrators have not blocked access to this tool, you can search it for yourself on your machine and pull it up. And I do have user account control enabled, which is why this box appeared, but I am running as the administrator in this case, so I don't have to authenticate myself. I should be running as a standard user and then have to provide my administrator credentials, right? Hopefully that's sounding a bit familiar. Cool. Anyways, this is Event Viewer. This is what it looks like. We are particularly concerned with the Windows logs. And I want to point out a couple things. First is the different types of logs within Windows Event Viewers. You see that we can pull up event logs that pertain to applications. So the actual programs like PowerPoint, what I'm running right now, or Microsoft Teams, or whatever. All the logs that pertain to applications can be found in there. Security, lots and lots of different types of security logs that you'll find in there. In fact, it makes up the vast majority of these logs. Setup logs, very few, but these will pertain to system setup, of course. And then system, just basic logs that describe how the machine is running. And forwarded events, I'm not currently forwarding anything from this virtual machine, so there's nothing there. This machine has not been in use for very long, but I already have thousands of events in here. And so this is to show again that your machines are constantly generating logs every time you interact with your machine. Lots and lots of different logs. And we'll come back to this a little later, how we're supposed to manage this. But I want you to take note of that, just how, like, on any given machine, just the sheer amount of logs that you may be generating in a single day. So if we dive into one of these, we'll say application logs. I'll try and make this a little easier to see. Lots and lots of warning logs pertaining to various processes. I see some software in there that I was actually testing out in here. Some information. We don't need to dive into the context of each of these logs, but I just want you to, I just want to point out the types of event logs that you can see here. Jump over to security. The audit success, as I mentioned, lots of successes because I'm great at typing in my password. Some setup logs, and then system, of course. I'd like to find an error. Here we go. The local Bluetooth adapter has failed in an undetermined manner and will not be used. The driver has been unloaded. That's okay, I don't use Bluetooth on this guy. But as you can see, lots and lots of different event logs pertaining to lots of different event types. Once a a user takes some specific action, it's going to assign it a specific type. And so this is important, and you'll see why here in a minute. Adam says, password typing, you are young and your memory is still good. Thanks. Not sure about that. Anyways, that's a quick overview of Event Viewer. If you want to dive in and take a look at your logs and try and make sense of them, go for it. I would not recommend looking at it for too long because it does quickly become overwhelming trying to make sense of all the logs in there. But you may go in and just take a look at some of the errors that you see occurring. See what may be going on there. But I'm going to recommend a more efficient approach to this here in a couple slides. But I would like to give my petition for why we need to be analyzing event logs. I've given an overview of what they are at this point. But why should we be making an effort to collect them and to analyze them? Well, for starters, we need event logs in order to identify suspicious activity potentially taking place within our environment. Let's say that our environment has been operational for a while, and so we have a pretty good idea of what normal behavior looks like for our environment. All of our users are operating with a standard local user account, and our IT staff is utilizing user account control to perform their administrative tasks, just like we discussed with restricted administrative privileges. If we see that, say, one of our marketing associates is repeatedly trying to elevate their privileges to get through user account control, we would know to flag this as potentially suspicious because it's abnormal behavior compared to what we would expect to come from a marketing associate. They have no need to use user account control or to use administrative privileges. So the fact that they're trying to continually bypass it is suspicious. It might not be an actual threat, but we now know that we should investigate it. Or say, for example, we see that one of our users is attempting to remove the antivirus from their machine. This would also be a potential indicator of suspicious behavior that we should proceed to investigate. And so we need to be analyzing our event logs because they could potentially point to suspicious behavior or anomalies within what we would expect to see. And once we have identified these abnormalities, we must then discover if unlawful or unauthorized activity is actually taking place within our environment. So if this were the case, if we go and take a look at that marketing associate's machine and they're like, I was not attempting to do anything. I didn't try to remove my antivirus. We would then know that we have a potential incident on our hands, and we would then proceed to enter into what I would call incident response mode and seek to, just following the steps of the traditional incident response model, we would seek to contain that threat appropriately, eradicate it, and then recover from that threat if anything was indeed lost. But the point is, without the event logs, without the monitoring of the event logs in the first place, we may have never picked up on that activity or anything in the first place. And if the threat, or say, actually, if the threat succeeded in their attack and we weren't able to detect it in time, we would rely upon those event logs to go back and to see what on earth happened. But if we have any chance of stopping it in that moment, we would need a monitoring process in place to be able to detect what is taking place. Recall a couple weeks ago when we discussed network segmentation. And I have here on the screen an example of a basic segmented network. This might look familiar to you. Recall that I said during that session that although this is an effective technology, its effectiveness isn't really maximized unless you have event log monitoring and analysis coupled with it. Because say an adversary successfully compromises a workstation there on VLAN 1. If they were to attempt to move from the workstation VLAN to the server's VLAN standing for virtual local area network, it's essentially just a logically isolated segment on your network. So if an adversary were to try to move from workstations to servers, if we had the proper monitoring in place, that adversary would trip a series of alarms when attempting to move through this network to gain control of the file server, database server, whatever they're after. And so this would give us time to respond and hopefully cut them off before they make it anywhere. Additionally, one seriously great benefit of event log analysis is that it allows us to trace users to their individual actions. And when it comes to security, the need for accountability is quite high. We need to be able to know who is doing what. We need to be able to know what actions our users are taking so that when something goes wrong, we aren't left just searching for answers. We can go straight to the source. Although if an adversary successfully compromised a workstation, we would know that that's where it started, and it may not have been the employee, acting as an insider threat or acting in a malicious manner. They may have just accidentally visited the wrong site, clicked on a bad link, and introduced that threat to their environment. So we need to be able to trace our users' actions to the source in order to maintain accountability, to be honest. And so event log analysis and monitoring gives us a pretty effective way of doing that. I'd now like to touch on something that is its own beast in itself, but does make up part of event log analysis. And part of event log analysis is this thing called network traffic analysis, or NTA. Basically, when devices within your network are communicating with one another, they are sending packets or digital messages containing whatever information is being sent. This traffic we also need to be monitoring. Some of the benefits of monitoring network traffic is that you can use network traffic analysis actually to serve as potentially an intrusion detection system. So we can detect, as I mentioned, a potential adversary trying to break into our network. If we see suspicious activity coming from a certain IP address within our network, or perhaps we have created a sort of trap workstation or trap IP address, and we're seeing activity come from that given IP address, we know that a potential adversary has gotten into our network and is attempting to do some damage. And so it serves as a potential intrusion detection system that alerts us when adversarial activity may be taking place. In addition to that, it can detect really any other types of malicious activity, like, for example, a ransomware attack. It can point us to potential indicators of ransomware being put into our environment and starting to infect our systems. We can also use network traffic analysis to perform what is known as threat hunting, or actively seeking out threats, actively hunting for potential adversarial activity or suspicious activity within our network. And so network traffic analysis is essentially just another building block to event log analysis. It's specifically focused on the network traffic, the internet packets, the information packets moving between different devices on your network. So let's say, for example, that we get hit with a ransomware attack and all of our systems on our network are encrypted. Thankfully, we had our data backed up, so we were able to just wipe everything and back up our data. So we're in an okay spot. Unfortunately, though, we have no idea where the ransomware came from. And so we want to get to the bottom of this. We want to figure out what happened. With network traffic analysis, we have the ability to essentially go back and see maybe which of our devices made that connection that introduced the ransomware. For example, we see that this host name on our network visited this malicious website at this time, and we see that a file was downloaded that appeared to be legitimate, but actually turned out to be ransomware. Or if we had our network traffic analysis solution configured properly, our IT staff would have received an alert that the user was browsing to a malicious site, and we could have just reported that right away, right? If you recall the hacking demo that I presented in the patching session, the victim machine in that demonstration was running an outdated and vulnerable service, vulnerable protocol on their machine and the operating system as a whole. With network traffic analysis, we could have detected that was in use long before the adversary attempted to compromise it. So network traffic analysis essentially gives us a much finer view into the activity taking place within our network, and allows us to dig deep and identify potential threats, potential anomalies that we may not have been able to identify just on the day-to-day operations. There's no way we would have been able to. Some other uses for network traffic analysis. It allows us to see when perhaps data is being exfiltrated or moved or extracted across our network and where it's being moved to. If I notice that my printer is attempting to send large data files off the network or to another machine on my network, this is probably an indication of a problem and I would need to investigate. Or if I notice that one of my users is trying to access our company file server, okay, fine, but they're trying to do this at 3 in the morning. It's probably an issue, right? It's happening outside of standard business hours. And so that would raise some alarms and we would need to investigate. Or perhaps I noticed that one of my access points has its default NTP server where it gets its time from as some NTP server located in Russia. Definitely not speaking from experience or anything. I'm kidding. This actually was something that we noticed in our environment a while ago. And so highly recommend you check as well if this is a default configuration for your access points or any other devices that are pointing to some NTP server. Check and see where they're getting their time and make sure it's a legitimate NTP server, you may just use time.nist.gov, which is what we use and would recommend to all of our clients. But these are all things that I would need network traffic analysis to be able to notice in the first place, since it's digging quite deep compared to, like I said, just what you would notice on a day-to-day basis. It again, as I've pointed out, allows you to track user activity within your network and maintain that goal of accountability. We have done a lot of research into network traffic analysis, specifically for small businesses, because we are small businesses. We tend to get sort of left out when it comes to the cool tools and technologies that are becoming available. And so we actually have found a network traffic analysis tool that we would recommend. It's called Logarithm Freemium. That's the free version of the Logarithm NTA tool. We have a blog on it where we walk through its uses, how you may consider setting it up within your small business environment. But this is a really handy tool that we still use. And I would recommend that you look into. It will allow you to do all these things that I've laid out as sort of overarching goals for an NTA solution. And additionally, it allows you to forward alarms and also like diagnostics to an MSSP, a managed security service provider, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But you need an event log analysis solution in place, and you also need a network traffic analysis tool to complement that. And so consider Logarithm. I'm not being paid to say that. It's legitimately a helpful tool that we've used and would recommend. It's also not a lot of tools out there that at least I've tried are super clunky. Logarithm has by far been the simplest to use. So give it a look if you're curious. And these slides will be sent out after the session today. So all the links and whatnot that are embedded in these slides, you can go look at. So what are some of the drawbacks when it comes to collecting and analyzing event logs? It can't all be good, right? Well, one of the downsides, and by far the biggest downside, is that event logs can be overwhelmingly voluminous, because, as I pointed out with the virtual machine, tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of logs are being generated within your collective network on a daily basis. And this is a lot. This is a lot. It's way too much to be able to fire up Event Viewer and assign one of your associates the job of, monitoring that for 8 to 10 hours a day. One, they would get bored and they would quit. And two, I don't think it's actually the most effective way to do it. And so you'll likely miss some of the important stuff in there due to just how overwhelming it is. And so it's unrealistic, especially for small businesses, to try and monitor these manually without some sort of help. We don't have the resources to do it, or the interest. And so the solution is we need a tool to help us with this. And there are lots of free tools out there that you can look into, many of them now online. But what I would recommend, what Totem would recommend, because this is what we do, is we would recommend partnering with a managed security service provider, an MSSP, who will take on this task for you of monitoring your environment. Essentially, what they will do is they will utilize a tool known as a security incident and event management tool, or a SIEM, that they will use to collect and analyze all logs, anything else that you send their way. So basically, you will configure your network to forward all event logs and also all network traffic to that SIEM, to that MSSP, they will have rule sets in place. They will have capabilities in place to know what to look for, and then they will alert you when something goes wrong. So it's a necessary tool, especially for small businesses. I would strongly recommend that you encourage, I would strongly recommend that you start looking for an MSSP. The MSSP that we work with, and I'd be happy to point you in the direction of, is GuardSite. Again, I'm not being paid to say that. They just do a really good job, I think. But there are lots and lots of options out there. And so we need this solution in place, and the best way to do it is with an MSSP. And again, ensure that SIEM tool that they are using does have a network traffic analysis capability. If they do not, then consider going with another network traffic analysis solution, such as Logarithm. And with these two capabilities together, you're looking pretty good. And this is, in a way, event log analysis, in my opinion, the sort of the glue that holds a lot of these other Totem Top 10 controls in place. Like I already pointed out the example of network segmentation. But if any suspicious activity pertained to any of the other controls were taking place, if we had event log monitoring in place, it allows us to step in and take action before a lot of these other technologies need to do their job. And so, yes, we have it listed as our 10th control, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the 10th most important. But consider event log monitoring and how you can begin to use it today. Consider an MSSP. Consider one who is affordable for you. That's honestly the biggest challenge, as it always is for small businesses, getting the security for an affordable price. Be happy to point you in some of the directions of who we have worked with and who we trust. If you're interested, just let me know. Well, this, I'm sorry to say, is going to conclude our Totem Top 10 workshop. By this point, we have now covered a very brief overview of all 10 controls, and we have given you, I think, a solid starting point for basic cybersecurity hygiene. And these controls may feel like they're all over the place, and in a way they are. But I hope you're also seeing that, again, none of them are particularly difficult to implement. And back to that idea of we want a layered defense in depth strategy to our cybersecurity program. These will fit that bill. I've presented it during multiple sessions how one control complements another, how a lot of these work together to support each other. And so consider the Totem Top 10 for your starting point for achieving defense in depth. Obviously, the fight does not stop here. This is not everything to implement. There are plenty of other safeguards out there that just missed our Totem Top 10, but would encourage you to continue that. You start with this and then continue on to other safeguards. So what's next? Well, where do we go from here? Well, it's honestly time to get to work. It's time to start building your cybersecurity program. And if I were in your shoes, I'd say that I would start by looking at our first two controls, know your assets. So building our system inventory, identifying our sensitive information lifecycle, the IT system assets that facilitate that lifecycle, jotting down all of the hardware, software processes within our environment, knowing what we're even working with. before we try to do anything else. Start with that. Next, we'll start to train our users to identify cybersecurity threats, train them how to be able to prevent them, like phishing, other types of social engineering. We want to make sure we have an acceptable use policy in place. Once our users are trained, once we know our IT system asset inventory, we can begin to prioritize other safeguards in our Totem Top 10. So recommend that you start with these and then begin to prioritize the rest in whatever manner makes the most sense for your organization. I would like to remind you that we have recorded every session. So if you need to go back and rewatch anything, you can find all the sessions on the YouTube channel. Again, I will be providing these slides so you can find the direct link to that channel. I'd also encourage you to visit our free tools page on our website to see if any of the resources that we have created can be of help to you. At the very least, go get a Totem Top 10 infographic. You've definitely earned it at this point if you've sat through me talking for several hours combined. Go grab yourself a cool infographic to hang on your wall or something to remind yourself of the safeguards that we've discussed, and maybe use it as the goals that you have in place, the objectives that you're attempting to achieve. Check them off as you implement them. And finally, in addition to the slides, we will also be sending out an evaluation form. I would greatly appreciate your feedback on this series, as it will help us improve this guy. I want to know if you found this series helpful, if you have any recommendations. So expect to see that evaluation form when the slides are being sent out. And actually, I can just stick it in the chat here. That's the link to the evaluation form. Again, not required. It's super short. It won't take very long, probably a few minutes max, but greatly appreciate your feedback if you have the time to do that. Finally, I would just like to conclude this workshop with just a reminder of how Totem can be of service to you. We want to be of service to you in whatever ways we can. If you are a fellow DoD contractor like us and you are pursuing NIST 800-171, CMMC, or DFAR 7012 compliance, this is our bread and butter. This is what we specialize in the cybersecurity aspects of these controls, of these requirements. And we would love to help you with this in whatever way we can. And we do offer a number of different solutions, from gap assessments, from workshops, consulting, et cetera. We do have compliance management software as well that we have created to assist those of you who are in our space as well, trying to figure out what to do in this wild compliance world. We can also assist with cybersecurity user and administrator training. I have emphasized the importance of cybersecurity user training. We'd be happy to help with that if we can, or any other cybersecurity related services. We hope to empower you, our small business peers, as you go out and attempt to put these safeguards in place. It's not easy. It just takes time, and it's pretty confusing. And so we want to help in whatever way that we can. Well, this takes us to our very last slide. It looks like we're going to end a few minutes early today, but this was intentional. I did want to provide some extra time just in case there are any lingering questions, thoughts, comments, or anything else that you may have to add to this workshop, to this series. Is there anything that was confusing that you'd like some clarification on? Anything that you enjoyed, etc., as we wrap this guy up? Well, again, it has been a pleasure to take part in this series with you. Thank you especially to Ohio SBDC for allowing us the opportunity to do this. Please let us know if and how we can help you. It has been my pleasure to conduct this. And again, go fill out that evaluation form. Hope to be hearing from some of you guys soon. And let us know how we can help. So I think I'll end it there. We'll end a little bit early today. I don't see any questions. So thank you all for participating in this series.